Beautiful people, morning to you. You see, the entire matter of forgiveness, many of us have grown up hearing, if you do not forgive, God will not forgive you. And if you die in your unforgiveness, you will die and go to hell. And we ran with that hypothesis as a biblical truth because if we look at the Old Testament and we see the kind of God that God was and is, he was more of a God of wrath and justice. In other words, you had to almost work and earn your keep as a child of God. And by that I mean, for example, if you read Deuteronomy 28, that entire chapter, you see that God says, if you do this, then these blessings will follow you. If you do these, then these curses will follow you. And the scriptures in the Old Testament say, if you forgive, so that your Father in heaven may forgive you. And this sort of a law carried right until even when Jesus came on the earth. Remember that while Jesus was on his mission, while he was physically alive, I'm talking about his physical body, the laws were still in motion. So people were still sacrificing animals to God because we had not yet, he did not die, was buried, then resurrected, for grace to now come on, for the Holy Spirit to now be the comforter to us, where we no longer have to sacrifice animals, bulls, lambs, and these things. So that entire, run and reign, we saw more of God's justice and wrath, which was still fair. It may seem unfair in many cases. And God realized that he created his laws and ways that humankind should have abided by, and we fail. And what had happened is that mankind started to bring in their own laws for their own gain and benefit, usually for power, for wealth. And they wanted to take dominion over the people. They misunderstood when God says we must take dominion over the earth. We would be like the CEOs of the earth, while God is the owner, the overarching chairman, the overarching owner of the world universe at large. So we see this whole matter of unforgiveness, and we hear, if you don't forgive, God will not forgive. And what has happened is that we have pressured people into having a false sense of forgiveness towards others. So somebody does another person something really heinous, really dreadful. You would call it unforgivable even. And because the person doesn't somewhat immediately forgive, we almost condemn the person to death and to hell. And that is sort of unfair because, we are a spirit in a body form and we have emotions. Remember that your soul man is a composite of the mind, the will, and the emotions. And those three amigos are the driving force into how you behave and act and the things that you do, and generally your thought patterns, if you practice to think a particular way. For example, if you're a negative thinker, some study was done that human being will think up to about 60,000 thoughts, and I suppose about 80 to 90% of those thoughts are something negative. And that is why you carry that behavior in every sphere and aspect of your life. And what has happened is that we have used the gospel of Christ as a beating stick over the minds, the hearts, and the souls of people where forgiveness is concerned. Now, God is a God, he says, he's touched with our feelings and our infirmities. He understands that there are certain infractions, there are certain misconducts, there are certain there are certain wrongs that are done to us, and it takes time for that human being to heal. For example, people, let us liken it onto our physical body. God forbid if you were to meet in a car accident or some sort of accident and you break your bones, you break your feet, you break your hand. Your hand has to be in a cast and your feet probably in a cast for a while. When then the healing is beginning, then after that you might find that you can come out of the cast and you go to a physiotherapist so that you can be able to retrain using your arms again and then walk properly again. You have to sometimes be on a crutch and on a crutch, my apologies, people. And it helps to brace you because you're still going through the healing pain and learning how to properly walk again. So even though your body was broken, you couldn't expect the next day that the person is operating as though they did not meet in a car accident. You couldn't expect the day after for them to just operate as though nothing at all happened. They have to go through the process. They have to go through the process, and you have to give them that grace and that mercy. Now, remember I said to you in the beginning, God says if you don't forgive, then he will not forgive you. You remember that in the Old Testament. So after Jesus came, and we still were practicing the laws in those days, then Jesus died, was buried, and resurrected. And if you read further down into the New Testament, I think in the book of Galatians or Ephesians, it talks about, staying away from the fruits of the unholy spirit. And then it says, forgive even as Christ has forgiven you. So he became that remnant. We never had to give bulls, so we never had to earn or keep, so to speak, in order to get to be in God's good book. So to, as in back in the olden days, where they had to almost live like how you see the soldiers, go left, go right, go forward, or a sort of Deuteronomy 28, the curses section follow you, or the blessings section follow if you do good or if you do bad, vice versa. You follow? But when Christ came and grace came, grace understood us. Because Jesus took all of that, he understood, he realized that, look here, this mankind has sinned, but I have to find a way. God loved us so much that he said, I'm going to find a way where them cut out all of this, and I'm going to bridge that gap, and I'm going to show him it more the loving side. It doesn't mean that he didn't do that back in the day, It's just that we saw a more just God, a no-nonsense God. He's still a no-nonsense God, by the way. And when Jesus came and took away all of that, say, all right, I take away the sting of hell and death. Don't worry about that. Because of me, you will develop the desire to forgive. Because of me, Jesus is basically telling the human, you will develop the desire to forgive. So people allow people to go through the teething pains. Sometimes it takes time because some of the situation is not easy. And two, maybe they themselves are broken and they need to heal from that brokenness. So when they're broken and another broken situation attacks them, so to speak, you see that it's going to take some time. Don't start to tell people, if you don't do it, you're going to hell. If you die on this unforgiveness, you're going to hell. If that were the case, then people, some of you are going to actually die on something that you did not do, because we're not going to die perfect. There's some of you, you're going to die on some wrong behavior, some wrong attitude that you have. Because not one human being on this planet is perfect. It means that everybody is going to go to hell. If that is the case, allow people the grace, as how Jesus has, to change. Because of his spirit, that spirit will be imparted on the individual, and they will, after a while, feel that unction to want to forgive. And forgiveness doesn't mean that you have to have that butterfly feeling. You will say, you know what, Lord? You died for my sins. I did you wrong. You forgive me, I'm going to forgive. I'm going to do it now. Mentally, I'm going to do it now. And sometimes people say, you can't forgive and don't talk to the person. No, beautiful people. You don't have to befriend the person, but you need to exchange words. There's power in speaking. You need to speak it. And when you see the person, you say, hello, good day. Don't wait on their feeling to feel loving and lovey-dovey towards the person, so to speak. You forgive. The story told of a woman whose son was accidentally killed. The guy went to prison. And he felt so bad, as time passes on, and he was reaching out to her. She refused. She was so angry. She had unforgiveness. She wanted him to face back the same fate, and she went on. And God allowed her to go through her sort of a diatribe. As the years went on, with time healing the wound, she became more compassionate, and she accepted his invitation to come. And she went to him, and they forgave each other, cried and whatnot. Today, she adopted him in a sense as her son. Yes, the very same man that killed her son. And they go into schools and social events to talk about no violence, to speak against violence, in schools and other areas. The story is told of a pastor whose son was cruelly killed in front of him. And the guy who killed him was a part of a tribe. Years later, he was going to be sentenced to death. And he begged the judge not to sentence him. He said he will aid in his transformation, obviously with the power of God. And he adopted the killer of his own son as his own son. Today, that killer is a pastor. Allow people the time. Allow people the time to forgive, because they will. Don't sentence them to death or hell. Guys, follow me on TikTok. Subscribe to my YouTube channel.